Welcome to Baker Briefing, where we make news make sense. I'm David Satterfield, Director of Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy in Houston, Texas, and this is Baker Briefing. From a domestic perspective, Iran is not in a good place. It's in its sixth year of consecutive drought. Many of the country's provinces haven't seen rain for months. At least 10% of the country's dams are effectively dry. President Pezeshkian has said that if rain doesn't arrive by this month, Tehran will need to ration water or potentially even be temporarily evacuated. Availability of fuels, gasoline, diesel are starkly limited and declining. The value of the Iranian currency is dropping steadily. And meanwhile, pressure from outside is building over the nuclear talks between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. The Republic has said that the Trump administration has left no room for talks, calling its demands maximalist, a position receiving very little external international support. So what's ahead for Iran, both internally as it tries to cope with domestic crisis, and abroad in the aftermath of the 12-day war with Israel this past June and the U.S. strike, which changed the regional geopolitical calculus? We have with us Mohammad Tabaar, a Baker Institute fellow and a leading analyst of Iranian politics and governance, back on the podcast to discuss. Thanks for tuning in. Mohammad, let's start with a review of the challenges Iran faces at home. How serious are they? How different are they from previous domestic difficulties? And above all, what does public frustration, which is clear, strains on the government, also clear, actually mean? How did Iran get here?
Thank you, Ambassador. There is no question that Iran is facing a series of serious shortcomings and challenges and crises that are in a way new. You look at the inflation rate, which is around 40 to 50%. And this is a country that has been suffering from a double-digit inflation rate for the past 50 years. The only time that the inflation rate went down to a single digit was actually during those 2 years when the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, was in effect between 2016 and 2018. The rest of the time, before and after, even the last few years before the revolution under the Shah, the country was suffering from double-digit inflation rate, which kind of contributed to his downfall. And this has been getting worse and worse over time. President Pezeshkian gave a speech a few days ago, and he didn't give much hope either. He said that next year will be the same in terms of inflation rate. He said it will be about up to 50%. And you add to the picture, there are environmental issues, there is pollution, water scarcity, there are also other economic issues, corruption, mismanagement. So the country is suffering from serious crises. In a way, you could argue that this is not new. Since 1979, they've been dealing with any of these things one way or another. But you add to the picture the population that is discontent. You add to the picture external pressure. The country is just coming out of a 12-day war with Israel and the U.S. The U.S. has reimposed the maximum pressure policy and the snapback mechanism, which brings all the UN sanctions. So in a way, there is no light at the end of the tunnel, and we could see another round of protests. The country, every 2-3 years, has had protests. There used to be political protests, and then economic protests, and then 3 years ago with the Mahsa Amini protests, suddenly they were driven by social issues. So we may be surprised by another round of protests. So in a way, these things can be more of the past, except on a much larger scale. But there is one difference this time. I'll end with this. And that is the country is going through a national security phase because of the war with Israel and the U.S. The regime is using this environment to increase the cost of protests and reduce the cost of repression. So the question is, how can the next round of protests emerge in this kind of environment?
Mohammad, I have to ask, a half century of double-digit inflation, that is enough to topple most governments. How has the clerical regime managed to survive?
This is a very important question. We often hear in the United States that more pressure would lead to regime collapse. And this has been the case since 1979. You go back and read the Iranian media, the US media, the regime has been through unlimited number of crises. I would say one strategy that they have often adopted very, very successfully is relying on external pressure to reduce the domestic tensions. And this has been very effective. I'll just give you one example. September 1980, Saddam Hussein invades Iran. Iran's president at the time, Abul Hassan Bani Saad, goes to see Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who was Iran's supreme leader at the time. And he says Khomeini had a happy face. And Khomeini said, this will help us consolidate our regime. So this has been the regime's playbook, basically.
And indeed, during that war, famously, Iranian Sunnites were Iranians first. They were nationalists.
Absolutely.
Just as Shia Iraqis were Iraqi nationalists.
Exactly.
It was a mobilizing conflict, devastating in its cost, but a mobilizing contest from a nationalist standpoint. So, beyond the stresses of the financial picture, domestic and external, and against the backdrop of events which have provided a certain rallying point for the regime, there is clearly and very visibly public infighting now amongst critical elements of the regime to an extent I've never seen in the past. Reported in print critiques one section of the regime against the other, the president making statements that are quite extraordinary in the face of what had been seen as guardrails on commentary. Is this about the deteriorating domestic situation, or is it posturing for succession? All of the above? What's going on here?
I think it's the second, but it's manifesting itself in the first. So the succession, the fact that Ayatollah Khamenei, the 86-year-old leader of the Islamic Republic, may not be around for too long is the big elephant in the room in Iran right now. And all different factions are already posturing for the day after. So you refer to statements by former President Hassan Rouhani, and you're absolutely right that it's incredible how outspoken he has become in the past couple of months, in the past couple of weeks, in the past couple of days, increasing so. You're absolutely right. It is surprising. And it's unclear exactly which direction he is going towards. I mean, it's possible that he's trying to, so he has been making statements about the situation of the economy. He has been complaining about the nuclear issue, the lack of progress on U.S.-Iran negotiations. And he keeps saying that everything was ready to be finalized under his administration, and how he told the administration that was coming after him, President Raisi, that everything is ready, just finalize the nuclear agreement with the Biden administration, and nothing happened, basically blaming the Supreme Leader and the Revolutionary Guards for this situation. So it's possible that he's injecting some tensions, trying to create some level of public support that he can use for the day after. That's what a lot of people are saying. But also keep in mind that there will be more elections in the next few years, parliamentary elections, and then eventually the presidential elections. It's possible that the reformist and moderate factions are getting ready for that point. But I would also add this, the fact that they're allowed to make these statements also shows that there is some level of basic confidence on the part of the regime, the IRGC and the Revolutionary Guards, that they may not be as fearful of these statements. They may think that the reformists may not be as influential and as popular that they used to be. But we never know. Things may change. We may go back to the tense environments of a few years ago and with the factional politics and the infightings.
Let's fold in something else that's attracted a great deal of international attention. With widespread noncompliance on hijab dress requirements and no clear path back to pre-2022 morality police, morality law enforcement, how is the regime using the situation of strictures on public appearance, public conduct? Are they using it as a relief valve, an escape valve for things that are more important to them, preservation of the regime?
In a way, Ambassador, this is, I would argue, the most interesting and most consequential story that is coming out of Iran. So recently, there was a marathon in the Kish Island in the Persian Gulf. 5,000 Iranians participating in this marathon. About 2,000 of them were women, 3,000 men. The images that were coming out of this marathon could have been anywhere except Iran. Very different from the usual pictures that we get out of Iran. A lot of women were unveiled, and overall, it was really, really different and fascinating. Of course, the two organizers of the event were arrested. However, the fact that such an event happened, and the fact that similar events are constantly happening in Iran, across the country, not just in major cities, smaller cities, all over the country, women are capturing the public space. It shows that something much more fundamental has happened in Iran. A former Iranian official recently said, the changes that happened in Iran in the past 3 years have been far more than the changes in the previous 50 years. And I totally agree with that.
As we could say about Saudi Arabia, but instead of the past 50 years, the past 250 years. And you see this as a critical marker. It isn't just an incidental tool the regime is using to relieve pressure. It is something more basic and consequential.
Absolutely. The regime is trying to manage this and harness some of the energy and use these forces to its own advantages, but we don't know if it's capable of doing this. On the one hand, it doesn't want to push back because it doesn't want to create that kind of a social and political movement that happened 3 years ago. There is a perception, there's a firm belief on the part of the regime that internal conflict will signal vulnerability to the US and Israel and invite further coercion. So they want to ensure some level of basic unity that they feel they have achieved since the 12-day war. Iran's supreme leader has said several times that this unity, this national security unity, that's this basic level of rally around the flag that they believe formed in Iran. Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei called this a sacred unity, and he has urged all officials, all branches of the government, all government agencies to preserve this and not to mess with this. And this could unravel.
So, Mohammad, the question which endlessly every observer of Iran asks, is the regime cracking? Do the regime's tools to sustain their position still exceed the other factors at play in Iranian society and politics?
I think the regime in and of itself is strong. There is a very strong level of cohesion within the regime, within the security apparatus, within the IRGC. Even those elites that are opposing the hardline elements within the system, they are pro-regime, including former President Hassan Rouhani. They believe that they are militarily strong enough to survive external pressure. In the final analysis, they believe that these social issues and internal issues and the population could pose an existential threat to them. So ultimately, what you see is a strong state versus a strong society. So that is what they are dealing with. So what they like to do is, despite all the issues that they're dealing with, social, economic, political issues, what they want to do is to use this national security environment to bring some portion of, some segment of the society on board to have, as I said, some level of a domestic base to go to the next round of crisis that they will have to deal with.
What has been the specific impact of the return of snapback sanctions? And I'll ask you to define for the audience what snapback has meant. Has this intensified internal struggles, forced meaningful adjustments in Iran's national security policy?
So the snapback was a mechanism that was part of the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement that allowed any member of the agreement to reverse, to bring all the UN sanctions if they believed Iran did not comply with the sanctions. And that's what happened with the Europeans. They triggered this mechanism in last September, and it came into effect a few months ago, right after that, 30 days after that, in October. So on the one hand, the widely expected outcome that many experts in the US thought this would create an economic shock in Iran, similar to what we saw when the US pulled out of the JCPOA in 2018, did not happen. On the other hand, we see a slow depreciation of the Iranian rial. So to give you one example, since the US pulled out of the JCPOA, Iran's currency has lost its value basically 20 folds in the past basically 7 years. In October, initially it seemed that the regime had managed to control the currency, but again, in the past couple of weeks, it's been going down. But apparently, part of the problem is a lot of Iranian oil is still floating around Malaysia, and China is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. So there are concerns that Iran may not be able to sell as much oil as it used to in the past few months. So I think this has contributed to the consequences that we see the snapback has had. But overall, my sense is that the regime may be able to ride this out and muddle through. I mean, the fact that they have been showing no flexibility on the nuclear issue shows that they think they can get through this.
On the nuclear issue, my assessment, and that of many analysts, is that whatever the actual impact of the Israeli and then the day of U.S. strikes on the 3 critical enrichment facilities may be, whether it was total obliteration or essentially a massive setback, a complete trapping, making inaccessible the highly enriched uranium stockpile that did exist, or rendering Iran extraordinarily cautious about surfacing any HEU. Whatever that case may be, Iran appears from a policy standpoint constrained now from engaging in further direct confrontational measures, either vis-a-vis Israel or with respect to the United States, including any overt return to an enrichment program. Indeed, amongst Iran's menu of proxy actors, only the Houthis remain as present, as threatening as they were prior to the 12-day war and the one-day U.S. strikes. What's your assessment?
I think Foreign Minister Araghchi summarized Iran's position pretty well recently when he said basically what Iran is doing is managing the conflict with the U.S., which means that they do not expect any breakthrough. In fact, they are concerned that there could be another round of conflict. So what they want to do is not to do anything provocative that would force the Israelis or the U.S. to basically carry out another attack in Iran. So that is the main concern that they have. And what this means is that they may not resume the enrichment program anytime soon. On the other hand, they may not necessarily open up to the IAEA inspectors either. So they may pursue the policy that they call ambiguity, meaning they will not do much, but they're not going to be as transparent as they used to be. But they're going to be careful not to, as I said, do anything provocative either.
But this playing in the road with the IAEA has already brought about snapback from the Europeans. This is not an approach, this ambiguity when it comes to IAEA presence and inspections, that gains much for Iran in the near term. I assume the objective here is they preserve the option, should the supreme leader and the security elite decide, to in some fashion, covertly or otherwise, resume enrichment.
This is definitely an option. It may not be in the short term, but my sense is that they are moving towards that direction. And the policy, in a way, has reversed. The policy used to be, let's be transparent to a large extent, have massive nuclear facilities on the ground, work with the IAEA, but now they've reversed this. They are thinking of going underground and then diffusing basically the nuclear facilities, building smaller facilities throughout the country. And this is mirroring what they are doing with the missile production capabilities as well. Iranian officials have said what they're doing now is building small facilities across the country to increase their missile production capabilities because they don't want another round of attack by Israel basically decimate those capabilities. And this is also mirroring what they're doing bureaucratically. Iran's president said a few months ago that they are essentially making every governor province a president of that province, which means that if there is a crisis and suddenly there is another decapitation similar to what we saw in June, then the local leaders, the local province governors will be able to basically deal with the crisis. So overall, the system is moving towards a decentralized approach, if you will. That means bureaucratically, that means militarily, and that also potentially means on the nuclear front.
With respect to maximum pressure as a policy, But the continued overtures from the U.S. administration to a pragmatic trade and economic interest-based relationship in which the regime may maintain whatever domestic policies, however strict they may be, with respect to the judicial system, dress codes, Sharia, so long as it does not externally project either return to enrichment or threats directed against Israel or its neighbors. Is that attractive to the regime right now? It's quite a unique posing of two things: complete freedom at home to do what you want. We are no longer pursuing regime change in any sense of the word, but we insist you adopt certain strictures on your external, since the revolution, strategic priorities, including the proxy agents, whether in Iraq, in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. Is this a deal any Iranian regime in your projection could accept?
If it's credible enough, I think they will seriously consider. The problem is they have come to the conclusion that the U.S. cannot deliver anything. Even if it does want to, U.S. domestic politics and the Israelis will not allow this to happen. So they do believe that unless they are strong, they're militarily strong, there's no other way that they can survive domestically. On the one hand, yes, you're right. I was just reading Iranian commentators reacting to the recent national security strategy document. They say this shows that the U.S. has put aside the regime change policy through direct military campaign, basically occupying countries similar to what happened to Iraq. But they do believe that the U.S. is still pursuing regime change, but using a different method. So that remains a concern. If anything, the regime is kind of unified towards what they call a strong Iran. Militarily, almost on a daily basis, we see military drills, announcements about new achievements, what they have done, what they have bought, what they have created. It's fascinating. If you go back before the June war, almost on a daily basis, the state-controlled media would announce something about a new nuclear progress. Now, on a daily basis, we hear about a new military progress.
Is this for internal consumption, or is it a genuine projection of we're strong, we are becoming stronger, and we are actually prepared for a conflict?
It's partly for domestic consumption because it was so embarrassing, because the regime could not really provide a very strong anti-aircraft defense system, but there's also an increasing sense of triumph. The fact Iranian missiles managed to hit Israeli targets during those 12 days war has given the system a sense of pride. And they're trying to rely on this and say that in the end, what really helped them to survive the war was the missiles. That was the only thing that they had. So what they want to do now is to build on this success that they think they had and expand the capabilities. But I would add one other thing. They do believe that during the war, they did not use other capabilities that they had. They believe that if the U.S. and Israelis understood Iran's capabilities and Iran's will to react, for example, what they could do in the Persian Gulf, then the U.S. would have a second thought. So what they're doing now is conducting a lot of military drills in the Persian Gulf, saying that in the next round, they're going to have certain activities in the Persian Gulf and affect the global economy. So this is a signal to the U.S.
Of course, the classic strategic risk, and it is enormous, is the moment Iran plays that kind of card in the Gulf, there will no longer be an Iranian navy, and Iran's own export facilities could well be targeted, something that did not happen in the previous conflict. It is baiting a set of bears, U.S. and Israeli, at Iran's great risk. But I can see that the idea we had abilities we didn't put into play, but could have, which might have given second thoughts.
And the issue is that they believe if they don't do anything, they may lose those capabilities. On the other hand, if they overuse them, they may lose everything as well. So the question is that sweet spot in between that they can find to signal that if they're going to go down, everybody will go down, to basically establish some level of deterrence.
So, Mohammad, I'll ask a very fundamental question, which has been present since 1979. Iran has a theoretical opportunity now to have a government of its own selection, its own choice, not subject to external direction or dictate or even critique. Is the continued pursuit of the revolution, the continued support, muted though it may be right now, with respect to the Iraqi PMFs and Lebanese Hezbollah, but that is intrinsic to the identity of the regime from 79 to the present, and it cannot, even for regime survival at home, be given up. Is that too stark a reading?
In a way, that's true. It's very much part of their identity to project such an image and to export the revolution and to support these groups and allies in the region. On the other hand, there seems to be the regime is also reinventing a new identity, which is Persian nationalism, and trying to appropriate that identity. In a way, they're in the middle of doing a jump ship from Islamism to Persian nationalism. And this is very difficult and very risky. The war has helped them to some extent to do this. It's very hard for the Iranian population to buy this. On the other hand, because they're in this national security environment, because they're constantly bombarded with images of Gaza, Syria, Libya, Yemen, there is a perception on the part of some segment of the society that this regime, despite all its shortcomings, may be, if you will, necessary evil that could protect territorial integrity. It's really interesting when I'm reading Iranian commentaries. Up until recently, we used to hear how Khomeini and Khamenei were basically the continuation of Prophet Muhammad. Now we hear from Cyrus to Khomeini, which is a completely different narrative. Can they pull this off? I don't know, but they're trying.
And in previous decades, from the analytical community side in the United States and Europe, we looked at Persian nationalism always as a thread there. Under the Islamist post-79 cover, Persia, Iran, is a great empire. It is a real state, not the tribes with flags, as they are famously referred to, in the Gulf, in the Levant. Persia was and is a great state, and as such has a right to the same things other great states possess, including nuclear weapons.
Exactly. That could make it easier for them to make a case for nuclear weapons. You're absolutely right. And I think that's how they're redefining the nuclear program as well, that we're providing to you, the population, public good, that this is not about the IRGC's institutional interests. This is about national security. Even if you don't like us, it's good for you in terms of safety and security of you and your family.
And who are Pakistan and India and Israel to have nuclear weapons? And we, the great state, historically, are told no. It's a potent argument.
It's a powerful argument. People often say Islamism is a powerful ideology or Shiism is a powerful ideology. I often say wait until you see Persian nationalism.
This is a space we will continue to be watching very carefully. And even though I would give diminishing odds to a new kinetic confrontation for the reasons you discussed, the changes taking place, the trends that are very visible inside Iran are fascinating. Not necessarily to the good, but fascinating in terms of where what was never a monolith may well be moving for the sake of its own survival. And of course, what then can be done from outside to try to shape and encourage, if something can be done, to move this in a less threatening direction for the sake of the Iranian people and that of its neighbors and the United States. Mohammad, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador.
This has been Baker Briefing, where we make news make sense. The podcast is brought to you by Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, which delivers nonpartisan policy research on the most pressing issues facing the United States, Texas, and the world. Share your feedback and your guest or topic suggestions at bakerbriefing@rice.edu. This episode was produced by Corinna Zema, Victoria Jupp, and Shannon Moriarty. AV production was led by Kevin Young. You can check out our other podcasts and keep up with our latest research and events at bakerinstitute.org. Thanks for joining us.